Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a little bit loud, so we'll take it down some. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, which is the final in our series of presentations under the Roofs to Reefs program. This one is specifically on water and the water sector. And of course, those of you who have an understanding of Barbados would know that water is critical to our very existence. We are in the top 15 most water scarce countries in the world, and indeed, the structure and formation of Barbados that we know that many Barbadians celebrate is as a result of the movement of water. Our karst topography, our caves, our underground streams, those things that are seen as so very Barbadian, owe their existence to the movement of water. What persons may, however, not know is that water is linked directly to mitigation, to adaptation, and to loss and damage in the Barbadian context. The largest user of energy in the entire island is the water sector. Because we are pulling water from an underground aquifer and then distributing that water across the island, it takes a great deal of energy to be able to move that water. And one of the key things that we've been seeking to do in the sector is to transition towards a greener approach to water. The adaptation links are a little bit more obvious. As I said earlier, we're in the top 15 most water scarce countries in the world, and we have a whole host of matters that we need to address that go back to the way in which water moves and the water cycle. And so what it is we are pursuing is an integrated water resources management approach, so that you start off from the time that water droplet falls and makes contact with the roof. That being at the national level, that topmost ridge or roof of the country. At the community level, the church, the community center, the supermarket. And at the individual level, from the time it makes contact with the top of your roof structure. We have the challenges that you would assume accompany a karst landscape with an open aquifer circumstance so that the aquifer is unconfined. And that water is in a constant journey to the ocean. But that journey to the ocean is critical in assisting in holding water back and reducing saline intrusion along our west and south coast, especially. Those of you who live in Barbados know that we have tremendous issues with respect to mains replacement. We have one of the densest road networks in the world. We're one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And we seek to deliver that water to every single household. And as a result of that, we have significant areas covered by mains. Many of these mains are very old. And that water system was built at the time when there was an empire. There is no empire now. And so if you look at Barbados, if you look at the United Kingdom, if you look at Trinidad, all across the world, everybody is having those challenges. But we are working on solutions. So we're working on that mains replacement policy. We're working on expanding the coverage of desalination water. We're working on wastewater reuse and the use of that water in other areas, including aquifer recharge. We're working on reducing flooding and stormwater management and using that water where possible for other purposes, including agriculture. Some people may know we've built check dams in a number of the gullies, making sure that we're not starving the gully of water, but we're ensuring that we get that increased infiltration and water back into the aquifer. Those of you who live in Lears or live in Bordens or any of those other areas will know that we've done a lot with respect to capturing water there for redistribution for agricultural purposes. One of our key partners across the sector has been the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, or as they're affectionately known across the region, the 5Cs. I have my good friend on the right of me, Doniel, and Dr. Doniel Kane can tell you that we have had some hard conversations over the years. But I can say that I have seen the 5Cs grow absolutely in leaps and bounds to become what has been conveyed to me from the GCF as one of their most favored partners. And working with the 5Cs and the Barbados Water Authority, we have been able to advance Barbados to the point where we are now the largest per capita accessor of financing from the Green Climate Fund. And today, I want to spend some time with you and with Doniel to talk about the two critical projects that we're working with 5Cs on and the Barbados Water Authority in the Barbados context. It is the Water Resource Nexus Project, WSRN, as well as the 3R Cruise Project. So Doniel, I know that you started a long time ago with WSRN and that you're essentially in the final phases and breathing a lot easier where that is concerned. I want you to tell us a little bit about WSRN, how it links to the 3R Cruise, and how you have been able to work with the Barbados Water Authority to realize these projects for Barbados.
Thank you very much, Ricky. Afternoon, everybody. I must say, I didn't know of those statistics in terms of largest per capita access. And part of what the 5Cs has done in partnering with the government of Barbados is moving leaps and bounds in accessing climate finance for the water sector. We are honored to be partnering with the government of Barbados and to be leading the way, because these projects that we're about to discuss serve as examples for the Caribbean region, and I'll explain a little bit about why that is the case. Ricky has set the context of water scarcity in Barbados, but Barbados is one of many Eastern Caribbean countries that face the challenge of water scarcity. I had the pleasure of discussing when I joined the 5Cs in 2011, 2012, our downscale climate models were suggesting 20% decrease in precipitation across the Eastern Caribbean. Now we're facing scientific outputs that suggest it could be as much as 60% decrease in rainfall across those islands. And as such, where we have water-scarce islands that are dependent on rainfall for aquifer recharge and for surface flows, it is important that we are taking steps. And so we're happy to be partnering with the government of Barbados in the implementation of two projects. Ricky has asked me to speak to the first of the two, which is WSRN, Water Sector Resiliency Nexus, which is linked in with the programming of the government of Barbados, which is a roof-to-reef program that the government is putting, albeit we're focusing on the water sector here. The first project focused mainly on the potable water side of the sector. It builds resilience into the water sector by taking a holistic approach. I want to say from the onset that borrowing from a colleague of mine, Dr. Ulrich Trotz, who used to be the Deputy Executive Director of the 5Cs, mitigation is an adaptation strategy for us in the Caribbean. As Ricky pointed out, Barbados has limited surface water flows. As such, it is dependent on its aquifer for water. And so you need energy to get that water from its aquifer, and then you need energy to distribute that water to the population. In the aftermath of a hurricane, the grid, the energy is one of the first sector to be impacted. And as such, An impact to energy would impact water production and distribution to population. As such, this project seeks to address that issue by implementing alternative energy sources at the pumping station. The project is implementing 4.5 megawatt of PV system across 3 pumping stations. It also seeks to put base load at those stations because you cannot operate the pumping station solely on renewable energy source that doesn't provide a base load. As such, it's putting in some micro turbines. Initially, we intended to use natural gas turbines. We're still using more renewable energy source to create that base load at the plant. That allows the plants to operate in the aftermath of a natural disaster, primarily a hurricane impacting the grid, so water could be produced and distributed to the population. The project is funded to the tune of $45 million, $27.6 million in grant financing from the GCF. There were some challenges in getting those resources, particularly around the fact that we'll be using grant resources to put those PV systems in place. As such, we needed to turn the potential savings from the renewable energy that would be put in place at the plant into public good. How could the savings that is generated from those PV plants be utilized to expand adaptation work within the water sector? As such, whilst the renewable energy that will be generated at the water plant will support in operating the plant, and of course, the savings generated will support in maintaining the PV system, any excess revenue, or one could say one might call profit, once operation and maintenance cost is removed, will go into a fund that the public could access. We call it the Revolving Adaptation Fund Facility that is being set up using the PV. From that, household businesses could access resources to implement conservation measures related to water, but also renewable energy technology in their business to support additional adaptation and mitigation action in Barbados. I'll come back to where we are today. We are implementing the PV systems. As such, the fund is not fully operational. But the government, noting the importance of that, has already committed to capitalize the fund, given the need to implement initiatives at the level of the households and businesses. Another key element of this is we have households that are vulnerable, where persons are differently abled, and so the project is distributing tanks. We're taking the approach of one could call decentralized storage, redundant storage at the level of the household. The Barbados Water Authority had a personal tank program that it was implementing, where households could have a tank at their house with a small solar-powered pump, such that if there's a disruption in the water, they would still have access to water. And from what we have understood, those tanks could serve the household for up to 3 days. Note that the water is not stagnant in the tank because the authority's water comes into that, and it is from that tank that water then flows into the house. We're distributing 3,000 of those tanks to households that have vulnerable persons, persons with disability, and the likes. Another key element is rainwater harvesting, primarily for agriculture purposes. Ricky mentioned some of the initiatives that they've been putting in place in creating ponds that would then tie into the irrigation system on the grounds for providing water to farms. What this does is reduce the stress that is placed on the aquifer by some farming activities. One of the things we found whilst developing the project, that several of the aquifers that were near shore had salination, saltwater intrusion into them. And so a lot of the farmers were abandoning those wells that they had drilled, and we're moving to find other sources of water for irrigation of their farms. And so this project is suggesting, let's capture some of that runoff associated with rainfall. Because whilst I've suggested that across the Eastern and Southern Caribbean there's going to be decreased rainfall, the other element associated with rainfall is the changing rainfall pattern, where you would get intense rainfall event in a short period of time, creating great runoffs and that sort of thing. We need to capture that water and see how best we could put that back into productive purposes. Tied to that is the fact that we will also capture some of those water and use a slow filtration process for recharging of the aquifer. And then the last component really deals with the sort of demand measures that need to be put in place, raising awareness amongst households, businesses about putting in conservation measures as it relates to the water sector. And that's the first project.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I think one of the things that persons would have heard going through that is the comprehensive nature and approach of what it is we're doing. This starts really at the policy level at the very highest point. And when you look at it, we've tried to set an overall policy framework that allows us to be able to achieve the sorts of results that we want. So you have the physical development plan that is complemented by our economic and social recovery and transformation plan. We also have in place our nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. These are tied to our national biodiversity strategy and action plan, and of course the Roofs to Reefs program. When you put those together and allow them to influence the water sector, you will then see that you have a series of policies underwater that are spilling out. So we've done the revised water zoning policy, we've looked at the water reuse policy, we've looked at rainwater harvesting policies, we've looked at our revised integrated coastal zone management plan, and we've also looked at agriculture and climate policies just as examples. All of those are tied together in what it is we're doing. And we're then able to use the fact that those are in existence to be able to approach entities like the GCF, to work with partners like the 5Cs. And Doniel has been one of our biggest champions and proponents for calling for the types of programs like Roofs to Reefs across the Caribbean region so that we can take that advantage of that. Mm-hmm. I will say that the experience of working with the 5Cs has been exceedingly positive in that respect, and we have grown together in understanding how to approach the GCF on things like this. So Daniel, we went through the WSRN experience, and you and I know better than most how painful that was at certain points in time. Can you tell us what changed between WSRN and 3R Cruise to make that transformation a little bit easier, and then talk to us about what 3R Cruise is looking to do?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ricky. I'm glad you said it wasn't easier the second time around, but it was, no, I shouldn't say it wasn't easier. It wasn't easy. It was easier, but wasn't easy. But the creation of partnership, the fact that the government as well had a strategic plan in the Roof to Reef program helped us to understand where our entry point was. And that partnership with the Barbados Water Authority, that partnership with key decision makers in Barbados, that partnership between the decision makers in Barbados and the Green Climate Fund, that partnership with other partners on the ground like the CDF, who is represented here today, made it very much easier in accessing the funds for the 3R Cruise project. But the 3R Cruise project is different. This is on the other pathway for transitioning and building resilience in the water sector. It's talking about reuse. And this, in our Caribbean countries, is still in its infancy. This project is innovative. This project is a game changer. This project, I believe, could serve as a shining example of what some of our other CARICOM country members could be doing. The Barbados has 2 wastewater treatment plants, a South Coast wastewater treatment plant and the Bridgetown sewage treatment plant. The Bridgetown sewage treatment plant serves largely the capital of the city and its surrounding communities. And it's a secondary treatment plant. What that means, it's treated up to a level where it's appropriate for disposal out to sea. The project we've developed and has been approved by the GCF for $50 million, 10 million in co-financing, which the CDF, Caribbean Development Fund, is providing, and $40 million in grant funding from the GCF. Intends to upgrade the Bridgetown sewage treatment plant to a tertiary level sewage treatment plant. And I must say, let me use this opportunity to tell you that the sort of technologies that are being put in is going to treat this water up to standard that is even above the WHO and PAHO required standards. The idea is to treat the water up to that level and then to pipe the water back onto the island. Let's take a step back as to why this is important and why I see this as a game changer. A few years ago, the Barbados Water Authority and its partners implemented a RO plant that was supposed to generate 20% redundancy for its demand, its demand for water. What we understand now is that that reverse osmosis plant is 20% of the demand that is needed on the island right now. So in essence, there is no limited, and I want to say no redundancy, but Ricky, you could correct me if I'm wrong. But you're treating water using a very expensive technology, energy-intensive technology, and then we use it to flush toilets, and then we put it out to sea. So 3R Cruise is seeking to close that loop by putting the water back on land, where it could be used for aquifer recharge, or it could be used for irrigation purposes. And a key part of developing 3R Cruise, and I kind of missed that, was a partnership, because this project was not developed only with the Water Authority. There were partners such as the Ministry of Health, which was of course concerned with the public health issues that may arise from the outputs of this project. The Environmental Department, my dear friend from Finance, representing the offices of the Prime Minister, late Hugh Seeley, which was advisor to the Prime Minister. And there's another key partner, the Agriculture Ministry, of course, which is going to take the water once it is treated up to our level. And we created a technical working group, and this technical working group worked long hours. There were disagreements, you know, finance people want things a certain way, and the agriculture guys want certain, and the public health persons want to ensure that, you know, things are in a certain, but that grouping, that technical working group really helped. So we're delivering 3 million gallons of water per day, potentially, that could be generated from the plant for either aquifer recharge or irrigation using this project. We're also implementing energy efficiency technology and renewable energy technology at the plant, because we want to move the plant away from a net emitter to be at least low carbon operation. Ideally, we'd want to say zero, but that in its early stage where we are, it's not possible. The other components of the project really centered around the capacity needed to operate the plant, and the last component, which is even more important, is the communication element. I can tell you that, and some of my Caribbean colleagues in the room, that we are not there yet. And going across the Caribbean and talking about reuse, there is a sort of taboo around whether this is where we want to go or whether it is possible for us to reuse. I always give the example of, and I like to talk to taximen when you get into these countries, asking a taximan about what he thought of the project. And his thoughts were, man, I don't think I want that water. I don't want my fruits and vegetables to have that water. So I asked what system he was using at home and how, when he flushed his toilet, where that water was going. And he said, it's going into the ground, it's filtered by the ground, and it goes into the aquifer. And I said, well, that's exactly what we're doing, but we're using man-made technology to do the filtering. And then he said, oh, okay, that makes sense now. So the public education element is going to be critical for there to be adaptation of this technology widely across the Caribbean. And you look at the project and you recognize that there's a sizable communication and education budget, because we recognize the importance of that for the success of this project. I want to also say leadership is very important in this respect. And I can remember developing this project, and I felt like there were moving parts. And there were bad moving parts, because the Prime Minister had asked the technicians at the Barbados Water Authority to look into what other economic activity this water could be used for. And as such, I think the government of Barbados is moving, if they have not already, Ricky, to put in dual plumbing approaches, where this water could be used for non-potable purposes at home, such as flushing the toilets. Many of our homes, the toilet is right on the wall to the outside. Maybe a pipe could be led to that toilet where it could be reused. So there are many opportunities that we recognize are opening up with this. It could be used at the botanical garden. It could be used for golf courses and the like. So how it is we could turn our resources that previously, and I think for many of the CARICOM countries, is being put out to sea. How can we turn wastewater into a resource, especially in these islands that are water scarce?
Thank you so much, Daniel. And you touched on a number of issues that I want to just draw out a little bit further. First of all, we have been working on the revised plumbing code, and there are actually quite a few persons on island already who had gone the way of putting in separate plumbing altogether for toilets. People like myself, because it doesn't cost you anything to flush it off of rainwater. You have the initial cost of putting in the tank, and then your pressure tank itself, and then you can flush separately. And what I've done is to leave the provision so that I can make the attachment once we had that plumbing code in place, so that we can get that dual plumbing while at the same time I wasn't breaking the law. And that is critical. But Daniel also spoke about leadership, and the leadership that we have had on this from the very highest level, from the Prime Minister herself. And then we have a committee that Daniel knows very well. There's a subcommittee of Cabinet on Water that meets every other week under the chairmanship of the Deputy Prime Minister. And Deputy Prime Minister Bradshaw runs a very tight ship in that respect, and everything to do with water reports to that committee. And you report clearly to that committee, or you will be sent back to do your homework and to return in that respect. The other thing that we have is that ad hoc technical committee, initially set up for this project, that has essentially been expanded to address all of our water issues. And wherever and whenever we need a meeting of that technical committee, it is called. And it means sometimes that if you are somewhere else around the world doing the government's business, find the time to get online, to get into it, because you have to have your say in the conversation. Because if it goes to the DPM and is not there, it's going to get sent back. And if the DPM makes a mistake and lets it go to cabinet, and certain comments from certain agencies are not in there, it's coming back again. It has also been very critical for us in the stakeholder engagement component. And in many of these areas that we're talking about developing the policy, we had to hold those policy decisions during COVID. And we had to find, how do you get enough interaction with your stakeholders to feed into the process, to allow you to go through a physical development plan, to allow you to go through a revised water zoning policy, to allow you to go through water reuse policy without people feeling that they were not consulted. And that has been critical. In addition, Daniel mentioned the education and outreach, and we're doing a lot of work under all of the projects, including a specific one run on communication strategies for reuse water, led by the Environmental Protection Department. Of course, we also have a complementary project going on the South Coast Sewage Project, where again, we're looking to move to tertiary treated water and to be able to reuse that water, which is critical in a country that, again, as we cannot say it enough, it is in top 15 most water scarce countries in the world. So, Daniel, we've spoken a lot about Barbados, and I want to have the opportunity to speak a little bit about the broader Caribbean region, even though this focus has been predominantly on Barbados here.
Yeah.
What has been the experience of 5Cs and Daniel Kane personally? What are you seeing as the challenges across the Caribbean region relative to water?
Thank you very much, Ricky, and I'm glad you did that, because I was going to ask your permission to do that. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak even more broadly on the context. So we spoke of Barbados and the fact that Barbados is dependent on groundwater sources. In the other CARICOM countries, there are similar experiences, but there are also different experiences. And I'm going to kind of divide it into two separate. You have groundwater resources, and then you have those who depend on surface water resources. Let me just say from the onset that the nexus between energy, water, and agriculture or food security is important. That nexus, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, and I want to say the wider Caribbean, is very, very, very important. Ricky said it at the beginning, and I don't know how many persons picked it up. The Water Authority in Barbados is the largest consumer of energy on the island. It's very similar in some of the other islands. Now, as I said, you have those that are dependent on surface water flows and those that are dependent on groundwater flows. So those that are dependent on groundwater flows, we've seen the strategy being similar to that of Barbados, where there's need for energy to produce and distribute water to its customers. The integration of renewable energy source into that system is important. We see in Antigua, we see in St. Kitts the need for a reverse osmosis plant, utilizing, converting salt water into fresh water. Those plants are energy intensive, and as such, we need to have technologies. I saw a presentation this morning which incorporates wave energy with reverse osmosis plant. Those are some of the innovations that we'll need for those countries. In terms of the surface flow countries, the issue is a little different. Many of the islands, particularly those in the Eastern Caribbean, are mountainous. The source is related to the mountains or the hills. The topography dictates the quality of the water. And if there are activities in watershed that results in disturbance in the source, when you have these intense rainfall events, the source becomes turbid. The current water treatment plants within those countries are outdated. I gave the example of an operator having to walk 2 kilometers to the source to shut down the intake that has become very turbid. Now, many of those islands are moving, and the islands in particular that have surface flows, St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are moving away from the old sand filter technology that they used to utilize to more sophisticated technologies that could handle turbidity. And that has automatic shut-off once the turbidity level has breached some set parameters. But those technologies are expensive. Those technologies as well require a renewable energy source to power them. Again, they're automated. Such energy is needed. And so you need to integrate renewable energy into them. The other element is, again, intense rainfall, short period of time, not as it used to be. So storage expansion is critical in those countries. And I want to say all countries, because where there's dependent on rainfall, it is important. Where the source, whether surface flow or groundwater flow, is dependent on rainfall, you need to capture that as quickly as you can in a shorter period of time, have it stored in the wet season such that when the dry season come around, you're able to have water to take you through that. Those are some of the issues. As I mentioned on the reuse side of things, that is only being done at the utility scale in Barbados at the moment. That is not being done anywhere else. I think this project that we have in Barbados is going to serve as a catalyst for replication across much of the other CARICOM countries. Again, we need to see things related to planning and policy, as Barbados has done, reuse policy being put in place. Some of the other countries don't have that. So while we talk about the tangible action on the ground, the set of policy and the enabling environment needed for that is important. None of these projects should move ahead without things related to capacity building. If we're moving from the old sun filter type technologies in those islands to more automated technology, it means we need to constantly have the staff of these utilities educated and their capacity built to operate these new plants. As well, public awareness, education, engagement is critical for that. We also need to tackle issues on the demand side. And how do we do that? It's raising awareness amongst the population in the Caribbean. Thanks, Ricky.
Thank you so much, Daniel. If we can move on to another key issue that is raised across the region quite often, financing. How is it that the 5Cs has been able to move forward with these projects and to garner the sort of financing necessary to take them to where they are now? And what would you say to the other territories in the region who are struggling right now to get access to GCF financing, adaptation fund financing, and the other related entities?
All right. Thank you very much for that, Ricky. And let me just start from the onset and say project development is expensive. It's expensive, and many of our member states, as we understand, have fiscal constraints. And so the partnership that the 5Cs and many of the other countries have forged with the donor community is important to unlocking financing at scale for the implementation of these projects. We were able to mobilize project preparation funding from the GCF for the 3R Cruise project, but for the SSRN project, through our partnership with the USAID, we were able to mobilize funding for the preparation of that one. It is through partnership, especially with the donor community, that we're able to unlock project preparation financing. It's also important for our national partners to leverage the resources that it has nationally. So if you're going to prepare a sort of study for a sector, keep in mind the bigger picture that's associated with the sector. How can the information that we gathered from that study be utilized in the preparation of a project? As I said, to complete the project for 3R Cruise, we needed $1 million because there are certain technical studies that go along with that. Geotechnical surveys that needs to be done with that. Feasibility study, environmental and social impact assessment, because we had to understand how flows from the plant into the marine environment could potentially impact any sensitive ecosystem. Gender and stakeholder analysis, which means not just at a higher level, what's happening, going knocking on doors to understand what a project like this could do to persons in a particular community. That is expensive work. So we've been working with partners such as the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, USAID, our bilateral and multilateral partners, the EU. We are also mobilizing some resources through the UK government, the FCDO, to support member states in the development of these projects. As I said, it's not enough. Whilst we may have resources for persons that could get some of the studies done, we still need additional resources to do some of those technical studies that are needed to get these projects off the ground. We talk about, shovel-ready proposals. We have shovel-ready ideas, but turning those into proposal require resources. It requires sleepless nights, but that's for me to worry about. But it requires persons who are also dedicated to this process. I go back to leadership as well. The leadership of Barbados and the understanding that these projects are important to the Roof to Reef program also helps. We were given our mandate by the highest office in Barbados. I don't think I've taken a picture with the Prime Minister. No, I can, now that the project is approved, because I was worried. But the fact that you get your directive from the highest office in that country tells you how important it is. And of course, where there are bottlenecks, you're able to reach out to that office to help unlock those. So sometimes the bottlenecks could be not financial, but the need for political will, for guidance, for management, for a push at that level. But in terms of resources, Ricky, it's still an ongoing issue. We do know the challenge that SIDS face in accessing climate finance. So the project preparation resources are just as critical in unlocking resources at scale for the sort of projects we need to implement in the region. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Donald. I think so much of what you've said there is so critical for us going forward, and it has really been a fascinating discussion. I want right now to open up the floor to any questions anyone may have before we close the session. The floor is open. Yes, Angela. I think there's a microphone behind you.
Hi, good afternoon. I have probably 3 questions between the two of you, please. The first one is a question I had raised in a previous event, and I was told to wait till today, so I've been patiently waiting. And it is in relation to the challenge of unaccounted for water or non-revenue water, which is, I imagine, an issue in Barbados, based on what you've said, as it is in my country, the Virgin Islands, and I know in most countries in the Caribbean. I think at home we're at like 60%. And we have a lot of challenges dealing with even, a net bulk metering system in place to even figure out where the leaks are. So I'm just interested in as much detail as you can give in terms of how Barbados is dealing with that challenge, including not just from a technology perspective, but the financing to do it as well. My second question relates to the tariff system that you have in place in Barbados and how that might encourage or not encourage water conservation. Again, I think in many countries you have sort of a perverse tariff system that does not really incentivize water conservation, because at least in the Virgin Islands, the more you consume, the less you pay per gallon. So I'm just curious to know what you have in place in Barbados. And then in terms of your, let me get the name right, the revolving fund that you mentioned that is used for water conservation programs. I'm just wondering if you can give some more detail on that in terms of whether those are grants that are accessible to homeowners, or is it concessionary loans? I'm just curious as to how that program is operating. So those are the 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. First of all, unaccounted for water. That is a struggle, as I said, in every single country that you can think of. Believe it or not, the percentage tends to vary between 35 and 60%. And so you are spending all of that money to pump water that is then being lost from the system. And you're trying constantly to bring that number down. As I said, our challenge is around mains replacement, but that mains replacement is also associated with road works. And we have had a tremendous challenge in that respect. Damien is smiling behind you because he knows that you get a burst main on the road, you fix it. What happens is that you transfer that pressure issue a little bit further up, and it ruptures on the same road in a different point, and you can actually see it go all the way up. What we've been seeking to do is to have a comprehensive mains replacement policy and do it in bites, so that we're doing specific areas, and then we move to another area and another area, so that you're budgeting for it as effectively as you can. But there are challenges there. First of all, none of us have limited budgets, and we're trying to figure out how best to finance this going forward. We've also looked at technology opportunities to see how much trenching we can get done using newer technologies so that we can speed up how fast it takes us to do it so that we can reduce the disruptions to persons. Secondly, the issue is access to pipes. And I was smiling with Damien just this morning. We were talking about the fact that Barbados is a small market. But when you put the Caribbean collectively together, and we've sought to do it to purchase in bulk, our needs don't measure up to other places. And so oftentimes we fall down the ladder of importance. And so accessing the necessary pipes is difficult. And you then have to try, when you get the opportunity, to store enough to be able to get other projects going that need those mains replacements. So for example, if we're doing Highway 1 or Highway 7, we need to make sure that we have all of the pipe in place to be able to do that. And so that then slows down other projects because we can't do more climate resilient roads if we don't address the climate resilient water need. The third is that you have to be very careful in your planning because that same unaccounted for water, once it is in the area where your recharge is happening, is actually a tremendous percentage of what is recharging your aquifer. So you have to be able to balance that water budget and understand what you're doing. And so I don't know if I have the answer yet, but we're certainly trying. And it is, to say the least, a significant challenge. But we're working on the mains replacement to be able to address that issue. The other issue of tariffs, I think, goes beyond just tariffs. And we do have tariff systems in place. We look at commercial rates. We look at domestic rates. We look at areas in which we have to augment for agriculture and what we're supplying there. And we're working to make sure that all of the different routes in which people get access to water, especially for agriculture, that you can have a fair rate so that nobody is disadvantaged in that respect. But the reality is that we never pay enough for water. We don't ever pay the real value of water. We say Barbados is life, water is life. And so that is the challenge that you have. We're right now looking at that revised tariff system, and of course, we have the Fair Trading Commission that has to do its part. We have the Barbados Water Authority, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have all of those different sorts of matters to be able to address and to do it in a holistic manner. And I'm going to let Donil speak on the revolving fund before we pass the question and the microphone to Damien.
Hello? Yeah. Before I respond to the raft, the non-revenue water issue is a challenge. And as Ricky said, you know, up to 60% varying across country, it is a big issue. And it is centered around non-revenue water strategy. As part of the project, we had helped the Barbados Water Authority to develop a non-revenue water strategy. One of the actions laid out in that is mains replacement. In fact, as part of SSRN, I mentioned there was $17 million in co-financing. That was linked to the Barbados Water Authority replacing 15 kilometers of mains. But the project I pulled that from had for them to replace 39 kilometers of mains. So it's significant. You speak to the general manager of the water authority and he'll tell you he needs $1 billion to do mains replacement. Now, I don't know if this is the forum to say this, but the Climate Fund look at mains replacement quite differently. Whilst it is a resilience building measure, some see it as a development challenge. And so the difficulty is in accessing the finance to do that sort of mains replacement, as well as the other challenges that Ricky mentioned around having the right strategy and phased approach to such action. But the Barbados Water Authority, I must say, is doing some other things such as smart metering in areas where they could then start to pinpoint where they are the greatest loss and try to address what I'm going to call the hotspots where there is most leakage. So there's a strategy that is being in place. The challenge is the finance and accessing the kind of financing needed to implement that strategy. I must say, and I missed that in my presentation earlier, so forgive me, it's important to leverage resources we're already using on the ground for actions like these to access climate financing. The $40 million grant for the wastewater sector is a drop in the bucket when compared to what the government of Barbados envisioned for investment in reuse infrastructure. I remember I mentioned there are 2 wastewater plants. There are plans for the South Coast plants as well. So here we're accessing monies for 1 plant, but there's another plant to be done. In fact, the grant is just 16% of the medium-term investment that the government is going to put into the wastewater sector. Wastewater sector, we haven't talked about the potable water element as yet, which is much larger in terms of the investment needs on the potable side. So I wanted to just point that out. And just to say, again, leveraging the resources we are already putting into action to access the climate financing need to enhance those projects is important. On the RAF, we haven't operationalized the RAF fully, but I think the question you asked was around how it is accessed and that there are criteria. The RAF charter calls, RAF, Revolving Adaptation Fund, calls for there to be sort of discriminatory pricing where based on a set of criteria and assessment of the household, the business, the interest rate is determined. I think we had interest rate going from 0 up to 5% on accessing financing from that facility.
Response, I'm not sure if you're aware, but in St. Lucia, they have a very similar program that was operating called the CAF for short, Climate Adaptation Financing Facility. Mm-hmm. It was a pilot program through World Bank funding. It's just come to a close in June this year. So I would just encourage you to look at the lessons learned from that. It wasn't focused on water alone. It was available to households, businesses, farmers for any sort of climate adaptation measure. But I would just encourage you to look at that model and what you can learn from it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I think we have 2 more. Damien is talking, so we'll take your question first, and then we'll go to Damien. Go ahead. No.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much, Danielle and Ricky, for this really stimulating discussion, and indeed, Ricky, for the discussions all week. Danielle, you talked a lot about the challenges in the region in kind of scaling these ideas, the public communications, the capacity, energy, fiscal constraints, project prep, access. And Ricky, you explained how Barbados is relatively effectively managed those in a real serious way. So if I can connect this to an earlier discussion in the Barbados Pavilion, I was wondering, Danielle, if you could talk about some of the opportunities in the region, particularly for scaling and in terms of food production and security. I mean, you discussed some of them, like reuse and storage expansion for all, which you can say would apply across the region, but of course so much of this is very nationally dependent. So I'm wondering, how might we think about what we discussed today in terms of this integrated whole of government approach in the context of your work at the Five Cs in a regional, say a regional food strategy or something like that. So regionally, what are the opportunities that could emerge?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Definitely, that is the strategy. Whilst we're discussing Barbados and we spoke about the regional approach, and even in Barbados, we'll come back to Barbados, we have a project for Dominica, similar, largely on the potable side still, St. Vincent. There's one for St. Kitts and Nevis, and Belize as well. In fact, the 3R Cruise project is already being looked at for Jamaica, and it's being looked at for Belize. Governments have already seen where this could go and have been approaching us. You are right that more needs to be done, because whilst this is the water element, on the agriculture side, more needs to be done, and a strategy needs to be built out around that. In fact, the 3R Cruise project, in my mind, doesn't go far enough, because whilst it delivers the water, it's a water project, the agriculture element, it stops. It brings the water to the farms. But do farmers have access to financing for adopting technology for use on farm, the appropriate technology? And as such, I've been suggesting we need to look at a program that now gets on farm to do a lot more. And that is also something that would be replicated as part of these projects. But that is part of the Roof to Reef program that Barbados is pursuing. The challenge is, again, and if left to Ricky, he would just want $2 billion to finance the Roof to Reef program. But I've been picking off, as part of his program, the different elements and trying as best as possible to ensure that we stick within those parameters and it's all tied in. Now, that is for Barbados, but as you rightly said, this strategy should be adopted across the countries. Part of the challenge we have in doing it at a regional scale is countries are at different levels of advancement in their work. And then the pot of money that we have for each project is limited. And as such, you can't, if we do a $50 million project across 6 member states, the impact is different. One project in Barbados is $50 million. And so that also is a hindrance. But at a strategic level, I think it's important that we start to articulate what are some of the programs we could look at that level. Financing those might still be a challenge.
Hi. 3 questions, quick ones. The energy. I recall you mentioning the energy consumption levels of the Water Authority. Was there any component in your 2 projects with the BWA and the MTW on the island that accounted for future energy use in an adaptation measure?
Mm-hmm. You're going to go through all 3 first, or?
Well, I'll let you answer the first one first.
Yes, in both projects.
Okay.
They include largely PV systems.
PV?
Yes. In the first one, there's 4.5 megawatts of PV, and a 3 megawatt gas turbine, natural gas turbine that is being implemented to produce and distribute potable water. On the operations of the plant, the 5 Cs, through the GCF is putting in 1 megawatt, and with support from the Caribbean Development Fund, they're going to put in another set of, I think, at least 1 more megawatt of PV to help run the plant.
All right, great. That makes me feel a bit more comfortable. Second question is on the smart metering. I wear a couple hats, so I'm very aware of the smart meters that are coming on board and online with the Water Authority. I also do know in previous projects, the aspect of compliance and standardization for equipment coming into the island was not covered. Do you know if you are covering it with these smart meters?
We can only rely on the BWA's position on it, which is that is definitely the case. Yeah. And we're actually looking forward to the full rollout. It is critical for us to be able to monitor what is going on with the system so that we can act in a more proactive way going forward. But again, it is not just the acquisition of the meters, but also the overall O&M costs of the system going forward. And they're also looking at where else you can apply technologies to identifying leaks to be able to address what is going on and to reduce that non-revenue water circumstance.
Okay, and final one. If you weren't able to address the piping from the GCF standpoint because that's developmental, did you possibly have discussions with the IDB? They might be able to assist with the developmental aspect of it, providing those resources. That was considered, Ricardo, or not really?
We always do, and we're always there trying to determine what it is we can use. We have a long-standing relationship with the IDB, with CAF, and with a few others. The issue is always whether or not the country has the fiscal space to be able to carry it at that particular point in time, and what the rates are relative to access to concessional financing. I wasn't really planning to speak on climate finance in any detail today, but I think that we will have to say at least something here. And the critical issue is that you cannot separate climate from development in this region, no matter what some partners seek to tell you. When you're on the front lines of a climate crisis, every single development project is a climate project. And it has to integrate and build in that climate resilience. And when you're in the top 15 most water scarce countries in the world, every single water project that you do is a climate project. When countries are hit by natural disasters such as hurricanes, the key thing that you need to be able to do is to effectively supply your populations with water. It is very easy to sit in an ivory tower in a location far from the front lines of a climate crisis and determine what is climate financing and what is development financing for you. It is easy if you want to look at mitigation and mitigation alone. But Daniel started here by saying that for us, even mitigation is an adaptation strategy, especially in the water sector. What we have seen here, as much as we've seen calls for doubling of adaptation financing, it does not go far enough still. You have to consider the fact that we have failed globally to mitigate. That has put us on the trajectory that we are on now, looking at 2.4, 2.7, 3.1 degrees rise as the estimates are, rather than 1.5 or below. And once you have that circumstance, that keeps sending up the cost of adaptation. It also reduces the effectiveness of adaptation and guarantees that it will result in loss and damage. You therefore have to contemplate what is being provided for adaptation financing. One of the things that we're seeking to do in Barbados is to climate budget tag all of our expenditure and to identify what is mitigation, what is adaptation, and what is cross-cutting. This will allow us to be able to more effectively point out how much we are really spending as a country on climate change, and to ensure that it is clear that what we are being allowed to access is just a drop in the bucket. And this is just water. I could have that discussion on waste, on energy, on housing, on agriculture, on flood alleviation, on ecosystems management and ecosystems protection. I could have it on health, on education, on information technology, all still with the cross-cutting issue of climate on that matter. And so when we start speaking of development and we start speaking of climate, we're in a situation where you can automatically add 15% at least onto every single project just to try to integrate that climate proofing. And then when you're dealing with a country where you have infrastructure already in place, and you have to be able to either move that infrastructure and relocate it, or to build around it with respect to that climate resilience, that becomes even more expensive. We'll give Angela the last question, both the first and the last, Angela.
I hope there was nobody else in the room, was there? Okay, so my question is specifically around water tanks at the household and business scale, and even critical facilities. And it's more so from a regional perspective as opposed to specifically Barbados, although I'll be interested to hear the Barbados perspective. So again, from the Virgin Islands, from a water scarce country, where we don't have any surface water, we don't have aquifers to any large extent, we depend on rainfall, which is very low. So traditionally, cisterns have been how we've been able to maintain a water supply. In the very short rainy season that we have, you collect your water and you use it very responsibly year-round. And that has been the practice traditionally. It is now written into law. So by law, every household must have a cistern. And it's extremely expensive, painfully expensive. You can spend maybe at least $40,000 US just on a cistern alone in constructing a home. Yeah. So aware that it's very expensive, but aware also that in a Category 5 hurricane as we experience, it's the difference between being able to live or facing a public health crisis, because we went at least 3 months without portable water supply in BVI after Hurricane Irma, and people lived out of their cisterns. In my community, we didn't have electricity for 6 months. So literally every day for 6 months, I dipped gallons of water out of my cistern, and that's how we lived. So I'm raising this because I appreciate the importance and the resilience that a cistern offers as compared to a water tank, which unless that water tank is full, it will likely blow away in the hurricane. And even if it is full, there's a good chance that it will still blow away. As we had happen in BVI, even for our large tanks that are used for water storage. So I'm happy that there's a movement across the Caribbean to at least look at water storage, but I'm a bit concerned that the only focus seems to be doing this by way of water tanks, and not seeing, at least for critical facilities, there be a focus on insisting on cisterns as the approach, which would offer you a higher level of resilience in the face of what we're up against, these superstorms. So I just wanted to hear, maybe especially from you, coming from the 5Cs, whether this is something that is being encouraged, cisterns versus water tanks, or is it really just a policy focus on water tanks? And what we can do, appreciating the higher cost of cisterns, to really help to lower that cost for homeowners.
Yeah, thanks. No, I first want to pass that to Ricky, because I think there's a policy requirement in Barbados for there to be, is it cistern or just tanks?
No, it's tanks. Once your home is above a certain size, you're required to have a tank. And there are different options. You can have underground storage tanks, or you can have above ground tanks. What we've also sought to do is to ensure that you can anchor your tank down and hold it in place. We're also looking at opportunities for separating and storage of potable water separate from rainwater or runoff water, and utilizing the non-potable water for non-potable purposes. Of course, we don't have that tradition of cisterns and cistern usage like others, and we also have the concerns relative to public health, and you have to go through your public health inspections and so forth. But we've been trying to ensure that all of the development that we're doing, we're trying to make it as climate resilient as possible in that respect, and therefore looking at designs. We've also had the use of concrete tanks. We've had traditionally all sorts of other tanks, including metal tanks, including other materials. So there are a number of different options out there. But there is a concern depending on the size of the system, what happens. There's also a program in place where we have water tankers that go into the community to be able to distribute that water. We've had a major program on island with respect to either retrofitting or building new reservoirs to be able to withstand the sorts of events that we're talking about. And there is a plan in place for the distribution of water to communities in the event of a natural disaster.
I start with Ricky because of that. What we do is driven by the national policy and strategy. And whilst we encourage it, because I think there's a regional strategic action plan for water, which speaks to harvesting and the utilization of these different means, it is laid out there. But without that enabling environment, legislation, policies, and even enforcement, it's difficult to get that. So 5Cs, I would not write a project and in there it says cistern only if I know that the enabling environment doesn't allow for that. So we're guided again by that. Of course, there are encouragement, as I said, through that national strategy document that was developed on water that suggests that is one tool in the arsenal of dealing with the issues in the water sector. I must, thank you very much for mentioning critical facilities, because under the SSRN project, and I don't know how much of our healthcare facilities across the region suffer from this, but one of the findings we had when we were developing that project for Barbados was that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Barbados, which is the only hospital, Ricky, right? The only hospital, didn't have redundant storage as per the requirements of PAHO, which should be 3 days. And so the project delivered storage capacity now that allows the hospital to meet that requirement. And as you said, 3 days, you had to live out of your, right? So you could understand the challenges we face as it relates to water and the impacts of climate change on the water sector.
The only public hospital, Doniel. The other bit is that the part that Angela has not told you is the part that most of us like to forget. Your biggest water user every single day in your house is your toilet. And so we're saying to you here and online to keep that in mind when you're planning and going forward. The state has been fighting to ensure that the state's part is done on resilience. We have an individual part to play in ensuring that we build out our resilience. And it is a good place to end this series. We've spoken on Rooster Reefs. It has a national, a community, and an individual component. Let us all look as countries, as communities, as individuals on how we can build our resilience. And I thank you for being such an attentive audience. And we look forward to interacting with you on Rooster Reefs and on related projects going forward in the future. And I just want to give one last round of applause, please, for Dr. Doniel Kane of the 5Cs.
Thank you very much.
And all the time I was saying it's a shit. What was hearing me? Exactly. Why is it not moving? Hey, something going on here. My stuff is not moving.
It's okay. Don't you need to have the mic on so Chris can hear?
He said I could mute here and they will hear me from here. What is going on? Oh, it's now moving. But my stuff is.
Share it again.
Wait. Hold. But it's muted here. So that's yours?
That's probably his.
What's the issue?
The camera and mic thing, that's yours up there? Okay, his, yeah.
Because he
His.
needs to
Okay.
feed.
Okay, so.
It's kind of like one of those teams.
I'm sorry. And how did we take off the notes again?
There's a use slideshow alt share.
Okay. Okay, it's going now. Okay. Great.
So all your people are in?
Hmm?
All your people are in?
Well, I guess I just need to get this presentation over it so I can like dip. Oh, sorry. Y'all ready? Ezra is coming. Okay. Okay, so a pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all for taking the time out to support Antigua's event on this presentation. My name is Shania Bijay. I am a civil and environmental engineer at the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda. I will be speaking on navigating the transition of green procurement in Antigua and Barbuda. I also have my colleague who is online, Ms. Krista Joy Breton, who is the EDA, the Enhanced Direct Access Project Coordinator. She will be speaking on behalf of WOTA on climate change and water scarcity. So now, jumping into my presentation, we will be discussing what is green procurement, the objectives of green procurement, facing the challenges, the strategy, and the proposed technologies that is going to be used in our construction projects. So a little background about the Department of Environment. The DOE is an accredited entity whose overall mission is to provide technical advice and implement projects and programs on behalf of the government and the people of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, these projects are designed to protect and enhance the country's environment, as well as to seek common solutions to national, regional, and global environmental problems. Now, under Output 2 of the GCF Build project, it calls for climate change adaptation mainstreamed into the building sector and relevant financial mechanisms. Now, these activities aim to fortify the building sector against climate change impacts. They entail upgrading regulations involving financial institutions, and most importantly, educating both staff and the local workforce. Now, what is green procurement? Green procurement can be defined as the purchase of goods that cause minimal environmental impact throughout their life cycle. So it basically prioritizes products and services that promote sustainability, considering factors like resource efficiency, reduced emissions, recyclability, and eco-friendly manufacturing processes. Now, there are many objectives of green procurement. However, the four main ones include environmental conservation, resilience to climate change, budgetary savings, and support for local industries. In regards to the environmental conservation, by prioritizing products with lower energy consumption, reduced waste, and sustainable sourcing, it seeks to limit environmental impacts across products' life cycle. Now, this approach encourages eco-friendly practices and materials playing a vital role in protecting habitats, curbing pollution, and addressing climate change, ultimately contributing to a healthier planet for our future generations. Now, resilience to climate change, by favoring climate resilience materials and technologies, it indirectly strengthens infrastructure against extreme weather events and environmental shifts. In addition to that, these choices reduce the dependency on resources vulnerable to climate impacts, aiding to mitigating risks associated with our supply chain management. For budgetary savings, this approach encourages the growth of local businesses who produce eco-friendly products to foster economic development within our communities and so forth. This would also include the support for local industries in conjunction to our budgetary savings. Facing the challenges. As we know, any sort of new transition we're going through, we are definitely going to face a few issues. And with this strategy, so far, my team and I have faced a few, such as regulatory compliance, higher costs for products, limited market availability, and complex decision making. Now, we have to ensure that procurement practices remain compliant with the regulations of Antigua and Barbuda. However, since these are new technologies that we are testing, we will ensure to engage with the relevant bodies and building authorities to allow them to understand this new transition and the benefits of it. Higher costs for products. Some products may be higher than we initially account for. So in this case, this is where we conduct a cost analysis, not only for the upfront costs, but also the long-term savings associated with the green technologies that we're going to use, which would then justify the initial investment of these purchases. Limited market availability can pose a challenge when transitioning. So in some cases, the green alternatives may not be available or more expensive than the conventional counterparts. So to overcome this, we can employ a strategic sourcing and diversify the supplier base while we're ordering in bulk, which is one of the strategies that we're going to use in Antigua for our ongoing construction projects. And lastly, the complex decision making. So we should or we must balance multiple factors such as the quality, the supplier reputation, and the performance of the product, because sometimes what you see on the internet may not be the standard you want it to be when it arrives. So this is where we have to do our background checks and thorough research before we can go ahead and have these purchases made. Moving on to the strategy. This is where we will now implement the specific strategy that we have chosen to purchase these technologies. It's nothing too complex, it's basic procurement. So in the first one is to create a transparency in baselines and targets. So we collect viable data and agree on the common metrics. So given the urgency of regarding climate change, it is important to find balance between quality of the data gathered to establish the speed of how things will continue to go. Now, we have to thoroughly assess, as stated before, the condition of the infrastructures. We set site visits, meetings, request data, and also have our own separate observations. This is where we can compare the data to see how adequate it is before going forward. Once step one is completed, the procurement team will now need to develop a roadmap outlining the reduction levers to be used to reach the target. So this would include factors such as the cost, the impact, and the feasibility. So for example, a range of potential levers in procurement for the construction industry should begin with the design and the development stage of the project. This would include identifying the types of technologies that we're going to be using based on the data collected and the data that we have researched, and while justifying each of these technologies to our conventional counterparts. So in addition to sourcing the potential suppliers, we also have to decide on how much we're going to spend on these technologies. So after we have created the roadmap, strategy 3 is where we will define the product and then engage with the suppliers. So what are the specs needed for this technology? How many of this specific product can a 40 feet or 20 feet container hold? What is the shipping time? All the relevant questions needed just before we order in a bulk purchase. So we can create a good supplier and customer relationship beforehand and have a little agreement with these suppliers as well, so it can be our go-to company when wanting to purchase more. And the last one, to transform the procurement system and align across different agencies. So this will carry us back to objective number 4. with the support for the local industries. So basically, this is understanding the process from strategy 1 to 3 and bettering it as we continue to go through the process of green procurement. So once we can understand it completely and identify the gaps from our experience, we can then introduce it to the local suppliers and to other government agencies in order for production and purchasing. Now, going into the proposed technologies to be used, the main one that we are looking into is carbon fiber, which is made from strong carbon filaments. It is very lightweight and uses less manpower for installing. So this is a short video I will show you of how it is being installed and the type of material that it is.
When it comes to repairing and strengthening concrete structures, carbon fiber reinforced polymer, or CFRP, is a proven method to strengthen, support, and stabilize concrete infrastructure. Utilizing the strength of the strongest man-made material in the world, SRS's carbon fiber strengthening systems offer a variety of permanent reinforcement solutions for structural components. Where traditional solutions can be invasive, have limited effectiveness, and add unnecessary weight to the structure, SRS offers a wide range of high-strength, lightweight, non-invasive carbon fiber strengthening systems designed with distinct advantages over traditional strengthening methods. Carbon fiber can be used to permanently strengthen almost any concrete structural component. Increase the load capacity of beams, columns, slabs, and walls. Reinforce cracked concrete and prevent water intrusion. Encapsulate and restore strength to deteriorated structural components. From increasing the load capacity of beams, columns, slabs, and walls to the reinforcement of cracked concrete and stabilization of CMU walls. These specialized products are easy to use in a variety of strengthening applications, and even civil infrastructure projects like bridges. The dedicated team at SRS is there to support you every step of the way with innovative CFRP solutions designed to meet the needs of your reinforcement projects. Contact us today to learn more.
Okay, so this is one of the main technologies that we are going to be using on our construction projects. So we have 2 buildings at the Department of Environment in Antigua which is going to need renovation. So instead of demolishing the entire building, we can use this material and wrap the building based on our technical specs and all our research that we have been doing. We also, so the next one is PVC corrugated galvanized or waterproof panels. This is going to be substituted for the regular galvanized that we use on our roofs. So it is highly resistant to fire, moisture, molding, low maintenance, and easy to install as well. So on the site we have been researching, which is Alibaba, we see the cost is $2.96 US per panel. And when we compare it to the prices we have in Antigua, it is $20 US. So that is a big cost difference in the cost analysis that we're going to be doing. This is a big cost difference to some of the materials that we're going to be using. So the other one is fiber concrete sideboard. This would be substituted for concrete blocks in certain projects. We're not going to be using it for all, but where we see it's deemed fit, we're going to be using it. We have composite wood, cladding, and composite lumber, which could be used for flooring, for the interior and wall interior. Also highly resistant to fire, low maintenance, made from plastic and other fiber materials. We have PVC-coated chain link fencing, substituting for the regular aluminum fencing that we usually use. We have commercial low-flow toilets. We have a plastic cistern, which is one that we're very intrigued about, which could come in any size, starting from $3,500 US, anti-corrosion, reliable quality. We also have the aluminum septic tank as well, which is being installed underground, so that's the same as the plastic cistern. We have solar exhaust fans, I will show you a short video as well.
Your attic can get super heated in the summer, making your living spaces uncomfortable and expensive to cool, and even damaging your roof structure. So, what's the solution? An attic fan with big power for big impact. Solitude's new RM2400 solar attic fan, our biggest fan ever at 35 watts. It goes to work all day, aggressively pulling heat from your attic and your home structure to keep you cool, protect your roof and attic, and reduce your air conditioning costs. It even goes to work in the winter to prevent moisture buildup, mold, and ice damming. Don't need the massive power of the RM2400 or prefer an internally mounted fan? Solitube has all the solar attic fan options to fit your needs. And thanks to their solar components, they qualify for a federal tax credit. So you not only save on costs to cool your home, but also on the product and installation expenses. Call now to learn more and start cooling your attic right away with serious power.
So this would also be used in conjunction with our AC inverter units. Yes, the AC inverter units we're going to be using as well. And our air-to-water system, we also have one at our department in Antigua where it converts air into drinking water. So I could also show a short video of how it works.
Life-COP28 Water AWG technology makes water from air. Unit air is condensed and purified to create clean, pure drinking water. Higher quality and more nutrient-rich than municipal or bottled water. The built-in filtration system draws in air, removing dust and particles, ensuring clean air is released back into the room. Air is funneled through the heat exchange and condensed into water. Food-grade filtration systems purify and mineralize the water, and UV light eliminates harmful microorganisms and chemicals. A built-in reservoir stores and circulates the water, keeping it fresh. The Life-COP28 Water AWG system helps reduce single-use plastic use, our reliance on supply chain production and delivery, bottle storage needs, and eliminate contaminants from municipal water supplies, resulting in drinking water that's great for the health of your family and the planet.
So this is the end of my presentation, and these are some of the technologies that we are looking to implement at the Department of Environment, and also looking forward to discovering more and going through with this process. So now we have my colleague, Krista Joy Burton, who will now be speaking on behalf of water on climate change and water scarcity. She's going to... Okay. Can she share her stuff? Can you text her? I'm sorry. Close it. Can tell her to share her presentation. She can't hear.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you for giving us this platform, and I do hope that it will be really insightful for persons as it relates to climate change and water scarcity in Antigua and Barbuda. So adding to what Shania would have been presenting on as it relates to our innovative approaches in Antigua, I do want to talk a bit about our water-related issues and how we've been trying to work to address it with other innovative strategies. So when we talk about water-related issues, and in particular water shortage, as we know, many SIDS, small island developing states such as Antigua and Barbuda, and other low-lying islands with flatter terrains have long faced water-related issues. So Antigua and Barbuda in particular is designated as water scarce by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and we're very prone to periodic and often prolonged droughts. In particular, there was a 2013 to 2016 drought that was the most severe on record for us thus far. Added to this, our current treated water storage capacity is not currently sufficient to meet the growing daily consumption on our islands, and any system shutdown, whether planned or unplanned, ultimately results in water outages. Talking about water costs in particular as well, in normal conditions, the Antigua and Barbuda relies on desalination for 70% of our total water consumption. And in drought conditions, this increases. It increases all the way to 95%. And since we have heavy reliance on desalination, this raises the cost for our local power utilities company. So desalinated water costs about 5 times as much as surface water and 7 times as much as groundwater. Talking about water pollution, we currently have waste disposal, and that is primarily by septic tanks. And this is a centralized system for the collection, treatment, and disposal of sewage. But this has yet to be built on island in terms of a central point of sewage treatment. So within the vicinity of our main city, the St. John City, water quality of small streams and oceans is negatively affected by effluent from overloaded septic tanks, leading to the loss of corals and growth of damaging seaweeds. Talking about the effects of climate change now, climate change presents an additional stressor to existing risks, with climate change projections indicating higher temperatures and reduced rainfall in future, coupled with the potentially more intense hurricanes, which already leads to significant disruptions to our water supplies. And I'm sure a lot of other island nations that are at COP28 can also agree with this fact. Now I want to talk a bit about how Antigua and Barbuda has managed our water-related issues so far, and the current challenges, the coming challenges that we have, as well as the strategies that we've implemented and whether or not they have worked out. So on the topic of water shortage, we've had increased capacity of desalination and treated water storage. We have also tried to implement additional measures to reduce the loss of water that takes place during the replacement of the mains of our desalination plants. On water cost, currently we do not have alternative strategies to desalination. The water business of our utilities company has also sought to subsidize the cost of water for our citizens, and so this also subsidizes their revenues from the electricity aspect of the power company. On water pollution, we have been working to implement projects that will focus more on water and waste, as well as desalination. And we're still working towards having additional projects that focus on that from our different agencies that provide us with climate funding. So in future, we do hope to target and address pollution and land degradation more heavily to ensure that we can install and upgrade control measures for reducing sediments, nutrients, and other chemical loadings. On the effects of climate change, under a our project funded by the Green Climate Fund. Shania would have mentioned that we do have our GCF Build project. We also have our GCF Enhancing Direct Access project. And under these projects, we also seek to improve the climate proofing of critical public services, as well as community buildings to improve resilience to and recovery from extreme climate events. So one of the innovative solutions that we're trying to tackle right now, and it comes from a conversation that we would have had back at COP26, is that we would have met with a Japanese startup company called the Water Corporation, and they would have been presenting on an innovative solution to recycling water and treating water, whether it is gray water or black water. So now you know we've had relations with Japan, and we currently have we would have had diplomatic relations since 1982. Currently, Japan's involvement in development assistance in the Caribbean increased greatly in recent times, and right now we would have had a memorandum of understanding that we would have established in 2022 so that we can have a 2-year agreement focusing on research and development for innovative technologies that are being developed by this startup. So Japan's ODA towards Antigua and Barbuda has traditionally focused on supporting fisheries, particularly the development of our fisheries complex at Point Wharf, and more recently on disaster relief in terms of the provision of equipment for removal of seaweeds. In 2022, 0.4 million gallons per day as it relates to our desalination plants at Fry's Beach was commissioned, and this was through funding by the Japanese government. So as it relates to water, currently they are the leading water tech startup in Japan with a mission to seek structural solutions to the world's water crisis. And this is why we're so happy to be embarking on this journey with them as well. With investment from a newly established decarbonization fund from the Ministry of Environment and the support of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry through its Japan Startup and J Startup Impact programs, Water is currently exploring overseas markets to accelerate its efforts in solving water issues. And it chose Antigua and Barbuda in particular as its first country for overseas expansion. So once again, I also want to acknowledge the efforts that is taken for smaller islands to attend COP and to interact with both private and public firms as well as NGOs to try to alleviate water stress issues and other climate impacts. So in terms of their system, it is a portable recycling plant. And I want to talk a bit about why small-scale decentralized systems and water recycling is a suitable solution as one of the solutions to our water challenges. So currently, as we know, the world is faced with multiple water issues, which are being exacerbated by climate change, water shortage, water pollution, and water infrastructure finances. So to fundamentally solve these issues, an innovation in water supply and wastewater treatment systems can be deployed quickly and through this system to address rapidly increasing water shortages and water pollution. And the systems in particular are economically efficient in the phase of population decline. And this is going to be very essential for us. So why we've combined in working with water, their system is combined with water recycling as a method, so to ensure that it does not affect water shortage. So water that's currently available in cisterns, water tanks, or rainwater harvesting, this can be recycled by the system and can ultimately help to prevent water pollution as the water is going to be going through filtration systems in order to improve the availability of additional water for other purposes, such as watering gardens, reuse, washing dishes, or even utilizing it as drinking water. So the system also ensures that it balances water supply finances regardless of the population increase or decrease. And it can speed up very quickly to ensure that it is an entirely new method of water and wastewater treatment that can be used by whether it is a regular household, government institute, or private sector. So, in essence, it can become an alternative to conventional, large-scale, and centralized infrastructure. In the context of Antigua and Barbuda, the small-scale decentralized water recycling system can structurally solve water issues for our island nation, especially since we have, the system has high recycling rates. The system can provide an abundance of water, even in droughts. And since each home, if households will utilize the system, and we hope that throughout our research and development that we can establish whether or not this is a viable product for Antigua and Barbuda. Each home that has the system installed will have its own water and waste recycle system. It will have stability of supply that can be improved greatly. And in the less urban areas of the island, water and wastewater services can be provided at a lower cost compared to desalination. And since all household wastewater is treated and recycled on site, we will no longer have that issue of runoffs into aquifers or waterways or oceans. And finally, the small-scale decentralized systems are more resilient towards natural disasters. They've been built specifically for these type of conditions, whether it's a tropical climate or for disaster relief efforts. So we already know that it is a system that can have the potential of being both sustainable as well as cost effective in the long run for households as well as government entities. So, in terms of the solution, can this solution be suitable for other nations, especially looking at other small island developing nations and AOSIS member states? Many island nations share similarities in the water issues, as I mentioned at the beginning, and they face this due to the lack of freshwater resources and the means to store the freshwater resources. So many are increasingly reliant on energy and capital-intensive methods of water supply, such as desalination. We are also faced with the challenge of providing services to rural areas or remote islands, which are too costly for building centralized systems. In essence, we also lack the means to treat wastewater properly, risking the quality of the natural environment, which is critical to the tourism industry that we heavily rely on in some of our countries. We are also tasked with the challenge of increasing resilience towards natural disasters, which are predicted to become more frequent and more intense due to climate change. And we have seen this in recent years. Every year, essentially. So the small-scale decentralized water recycling systems have the potential to become a game changer in the fight against these issues. And Antigua and Barbuda and the Water Corporation are currently working and will continue to work together to explore and to validate this opportunity to develop a model of solving water issues that can be applied to any island nation around the world. And as we continue our research, we are currently in Antigua and Barbuda exploring live demonstrations and having citizens take part in taking showers, utilizing the system, as well as giving us key feedback on their interests and on their interest in the system, as well as whether or not the cost would be effective for their families. So we hope that by next year at COP and at other international conferences, we're able to also talk a bit more about our research and show key data analytics. Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone for your time and attention, and I hope you guys found this presentation, well, both presentations, very useful and insightful, and thank you to the Barbados Pavilion for having us.